They say that when a species reaches for the stars, the universe watches. When they master faster-than-light travel, the cosmos takes notice. But when humanity went to war, the very fabric of space-time held its breath. I am Zekthara, former strategic analyst of the Galactic Confederation's Third Fleet, and I witnessed the impossible. For 3,000 cycles, our alliance has maintained peace across 17 star systems through superior technology, ancient wisdom, and the unshakable belief that warfare was a relic of primitive civilizations. We were wronged. The humans arrived in our galaxy like a whisper, a single exploration vessel, curious and seemingly harmless. Their technology was crude, their ships barely spaceworthy by our standards, and their diplomatic efforts charmingly naive. We welcomed them as we had welcomed dozens of emerging species before, with condescending patience and carefully controlled integration protocols. But when the Void Hunters emerged from the dark spaces between stars, when our mighty fleets crumbled like sand before their incomprehensible weapons, when our oldest allies fell silent one by one, that's when the humans showed us what they truly were. This is the story of how Earth's children taught an ancient galaxy that sometimes the only answer to extinction is controlled chaos. This is why, even now, as I record these words in the safety of a bunker buried deep beneath New Geneva, veteran commanders from 100 worlds still wake screaming from dreams of human war cries. This is why the stars themselves learned to tremble. The first human ship that entered our galaxy was pathetically small. The ESV Curiosity Asterisk, a research vessel barely 200 meters in length, drifted into the outer perimeter of the Confederation's border systems like a lost child stumbling into a cathedral. Its hull was scarred and pitted from micrometeorite impacts, its energy signatures so primitive that our automated defense systems initially classified it as space debris. Ambassador Vental was the first to make contact. As the Confederation's senior xenobiologist and diplomatic attaché for Sector 7, he had overseen the integration of 12 previously unknown species over his 4-century career. The process was routine by now. Establish communication protocols, assess technological development, evaluate potential contributions to galactic society, and gradually introduce the newcomers to the vast network of civilizations that had chosen cooperation over conflict. Another curiosity-driven species, Vental had noted in his initial report, transmitted back to the Confederation Council on Nexus Prime. Bipedal, carbon-based, showing all the hallmarks of rapid technological advancement without corresponding social evolution. Preliminary scans suggest they've barely mastered fusion power, yet somehow developed a crude form of faster-than-light travel, typical for a species in transitional development phase. The human captain, Sarah Chen, had been remarkably composed during first contact. Through the universal translators, her voice carried what Vental described as measured curiosity combined with appropriate caution. She explained that Earth had detected unusual energy signatures from this region of space and dispatched the Curiosity to investigate. Her crew of 57 scientists and explorers represented the finest minds of their species, sent on what they called humanity's first interstellar mission. What struck Vental most was their questions. While most newly contacted species inquired about trade routes, territorial boundaries, or technological exchanges, the humans seemed genuinely fascinated by the diversity of life they encountered. Captain Chen spent hours discussing the evolutionary paths of different Confederation species, the philosophical implications of galactic civilization, and the methods by which conflicts were resolved between worlds. They seem almost innocent, Vental had confided to his assistant, Carol of the Zephyrian Collective. There's no immediate attempt to assess our military capabilities, no probing questions about resource distribution or territorial claims. They're genuinely excited about the possibility of learning from other civilizations. The Curiosity was invited to Waypoint Station, a massive diplomatic facility orbiting the gas giant Helix 9. The station served as a neutral meeting ground where new species could be gradually introduced to the complexities of galactic society. It housed representatives from 47 different civilizations, each contributing their unique perspectives to the Confederation's collective wisdom. As strategic analyst for the Third Fleet, I was stationed at Waypoint Station to oversee the humans' integration process. My species, the Keth Mori, had been part of the Confederation for over 2 millennia, and our analytical abilities had proved invaluable in assessing new civilizations. We possessed what other species called threat perception sensitivity, an evolutionary trait that allowed us to detect potential dangers with remarkable accuracy. The humans registered as peculiar. Captain Chen and her senior officers toured the station with genuine wonder, asking detailed questions about everything from the artificial gravity systems to the philosophical principles underlying Confederation law. They were particularly interested in our conflict resolution mechanisms, spending an entire day with the Mediation Council learning about the legal frameworks that had maintained peace across 17 star systems for 3,000 cycles. Fascinating approach, Dr. James Morrison, their military historian, had commented. You've essentially eliminated warfare through mandatory arbitration and economic interdependence. Every species has something the others need, so maintaining peace becomes economically advantageous. Precisely, responded Councillor Thekvar of the Altarian Republic. Warfare is inefficient. It destroys resources, disrupts trade, and prevents the advancement of knowledge. When conflicts arise, our mediation protocols identify the root causes and develop mutually beneficial solutions. Dr. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. And if a species refuses mediation? That has never occurred, Thekvar replied. The economic and social benefits of Confederation membership far outweigh any potential gains from aggressive behavior. We offer technology, trade partnerships, cultural exchange, and access to the collective knowledge of 47 civilizations. No rational species would choose isolation and hostility over such advantages. I watched the humans carefully during these discussions. Their facial expressions, which our xenobiologists had learned to interpret, suggested deep interest rather than skepticism. Captain Chen took extensive notes, her officers asked clarifying questions, and they seemed genuinely impressed by the Confederation's achievements. Yet something about them triggered my threat perception instincts. It wasn't anything obvious. They were polite, respectful, and showed appropriate humility when confronted with technology far beyond their current capabilities. Their psychological profiles suggested typical patterns for a species in early galactic development: curiosity-driven exploration, eagerness to learn, and a healthy respect for more advanced civilizations. But there were subtle inconsistencies. Dr. Morrison's questions about conflict resolution seemed unusually detailed. Their engineer, Commander Lisa Park, showed remarkable understanding of defensive systems despite claiming limited military experience. And Captain Chen herself possessed a quality I had difficulty categorizing, a stillness that reminded me of predators from my homeworld. "Tell me about your home system," I had asked during one of our private conversations. We were in the station's observation deck, watching the aurora-like energy discharges of Helix 9's magnetosphere. "Earth is beautiful," Chen replied, her expression softening. "Blue oceans, green continents, billions of different species sharing one world. We've had our challenges, conflicts, environmental problems, social divisions, but we're learning to work together." "Conflicts?" I probed gently. Her smile became complex. "We haven't always been good at sharing resources or respecting differences. Wars have been common throughout our history, but we're trying to do better. This mission, reaching out to other civilizations, it represents our hope that we can become something greater than what we've been." "What do you mean by wars?" I asked. The term didn't translate cleanly into Confederation standard. Captain Chen paused, choosing her words carefully. "Organized violence between groups, sometimes for resources, sometimes for ideological differences, sometimes simply because communication breaks down and fear takes over." I felt my threat perception instincts spike. Organized violence was a concept so foreign to modern galactic civilization that we barely had words for it. The Confederation had maintained perfect peace for 3 millennia precisely because we had evolved beyond such primitive responses. "But those are ancient history now," I pressed. "Recent history," Chen corrected. "Our last major global conflict ended less than a century ago. We still have smaller conflicts, but nothing approaching the scale of what we call the world wars." Global conflicts, plural, within recent history. I struggled to process this information. The humans spoke of organized violence as casually as we might discuss weather patterns. Yet they seemed genuinely peaceful, even philosophical about their desire to move beyond such behavior. "Perhaps," I suggested carefully, It would be beneficial for your species to study our conflict resolution methods more thoroughly. The Confederation has developed sophisticated techniques for preventing the escalation of disagreements. We'd appreciate that, Chen agreed. Though I should mention, we've also developed some techniques of our own. Necessity, as they say, is the mother of invention. Over the following weeks, as the Asterisk Curiosity remained docked at Waypoint Station, I compiled my observations into a preliminary assessment report. The humans were clearly intelligent, technologically innovative, and culturally adaptable. Their crude, faster-than-light drive suggested remarkable engineering capabilities despite limited resources. They would likely prove valuable contributors to Confederation science and exploration efforts. However, their history of large-scale organized violence represented a concerning anomaly. Most species developed conflict resolution mechanisms as they advanced technologically, recognizing that warfare became increasingly destructive and therefore counterproductive. The humans appeared to have developed alongside their violent tendencies rather than beyond them. I recommended extended observation and gradual integration, with particular attention to their psychological adaptation to Confederation peace protocols. 2 months later, as Captain Chen prepared to return to Earth with detailed information about the Confederation and an invitation for formal diplomatic contact, she stopped by my office. "Analyst Zekthara," she said, using the formal address protocols she had learned. "I wanted to thank you for your patience with our questions. I know some of our historical perspectives must seem primitive to advanced civilizations like yours." "Not primitive," I replied diplomatically. "Simply different. Every species follows its own evolutionary path." Chen smiled, but her eyes held that predatory stillness I had noticed before. "I hope the Confederation's path continues to prove successful. Peace is a beautiful thing, and you've built something remarkable here." "You sound uncertain," I observed. "Not uncertain," Chen corrected. "Cautious. In our experience, beautiful things often attract those who would destroy them. I hope your galaxy has been fortunate enough to avoid such complications." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental systems. "What do you mean?" "Nothing specific," Chen assured me. "It's just that in human history, periods of extended peace often ended abruptly when someone decided they preferred conquest to cooperation. I'm sure advanced civilizations like yours have evolved beyond such concerns." The Curiosity departed the next day, carrying with it samples of Confederation technology, cultural records, and detailed star charts. Captain Chen had promised to return within 2 years with a proper diplomatic mission. I filed my final report recommending full integration protocols, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we had fundamentally misunderstood something crucial about humanity. 6 months later, the deep space monitoring stations detected massive energy signatures approaching from the void between galaxies. Signatures that defied every known law of physics, generated by ships the size of moons, carrying technologies that made our most advanced systems look like stone tools. The Void Hunters had found us. And suddenly, Captain Chen's casual comments about the fragility of peace took on an entirely different meaning. The first indication that our galaxy faced an existential threat came not through our sophisticated early warning systems, but through silence. The mining colonies in the Outer Rim simply stopped transmitting. No distress calls, no requests for assistance, no final desperate messages, just an abrupt end to 3 centuries of routine communications. Admiral Keston of the 7th Fleet initially attributed the silence to equipment failures. The Outer Rim colonies were notoriously understaffed and relied heavily on automated systems that occasionally required maintenance. When the silence stretched beyond 48 hours, he dispatched a patrol squadron to investigate. The squadron never reported back. By the time Fleet Command acknowledged we faced something unprecedented, we had lost contact with 17 colonies, 4 research stations, and 2 entire patrol fleets. The affected region formed a perfect sphere roughly 50 light-years in diameter, expanding outward at approximately 1 light-year per standard day. I was reassigned from Waypoint Station to the Confederation's Strategic Analysis Division on Nexus Prime, where teams of specialists from every member species worked frantically to understand what we faced. The data was disturbing and contradictory. Long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures within the affected region, readings so intense they overloaded our instruments at maximum range. Yet closer investigation revealed nothing but empty space, where thriving colonies had existed for generations. "It's as if they were simply erased," reported Dr. Yathala, our senior physicist. "Not destroyed, not relocated, erased. Matter, energy, even the quantum residue that should remain after any known form of destruction. Nothing." The Confederation Council convened emergency sessions, debating response strategies with increasing desperation. Our greatest military minds, veterans who had overseen the peaceful integration of dozens of species, found themselves confronting a scenario their experience couldn't address. Grand Admiral Mordeth, Supreme Commander of all Confederation forces, summarized our situation with characteristic bluntness. "In 3,000 years of galactic civilization, we have encountered no force that could not be reasoned with, negotiated with, or at least understood. Our military capabilities exist primarily for asteroid clearance and emergency rescue operations. We are facing an enemy we cannot comprehend using resources designed for peacekeeping." Our fleets were impressive by the standards of civilized space. Massive vessels equipped with advanced shielding, sophisticated sensors, and energy weapons capable of cracking small moons. But they were explorers and peacekeepers, not warships. Our crews trained for rescue operations, scientific surveys, and the occasional pirate suppression mission. 3 weeks after the first colonies went silent, we finally got visual confirmation of our enemy. The surveillance drone Deep I-7 was positioned at the edge of the expanding void. Its sensors focused on the seemingly empty space where the mining station Kepler-7 had once operated. The drone's AI was programmed to retreat at the first sign of hostile contact. But what it recorded in those final seconds before its destruction changed everything we thought we knew about the nature of space itself. The footage showed reality tearing. A massive rent appeared in space-time itself, wider than our largest space stations, and pulsing with energies that hurt to look at even through filtered displays. From this wound in the universe emerged something that defied every law of physics we understood. The Void Hunter ship was simultaneously massive and impossible to measure accurately. It seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its true size shifting depending on the angle of observation. The hull, if it could be called a hull, appeared to be constructed from crystallized dark matter, materials that by definition should not interact with normal matter, yet somehow formed stable structures. Appendages that might have been weapons or sensors extended from the central mass, each one larger than our heaviest cruisers. These appendages moved with organic fluidity, reaching out to touch the quantum foam of space itself. Where they made contact, reality simply ceased. The drone's final transmission lasted 3.7 seconds. In that time, we observed the Void Hunter ship manipulate fundamental forces in ways that violated every principle of engineering we had developed over millennia of technological advancement. It didn't fire weapons. It rewrote local physics to make our matter incompatible with existence. The footage was shown to the Confederation Council in a sealed session. Of the 47 species represented, 34 immediately voted to attempt negotiation through standard diplomatic channels. 8 voted for immediate evacuation of all border worlds. 5 voted for a show of military force to demonstrate our technological capabilities and hopefully discourage aggression. None voted for what Strategic Analysis Division recommended: total mobilization for galactic war. "War is an obsolete concept," insisted Counselor Vexbury of the Crystalline Hegemony. "These entities, whatever they are, must have logical motivations. Perhaps they require resources we can provide through trade. Perhaps they seek knowledge we can share. Perhaps they are testing our responses to determine our intentions." Ambassador Rindar of the Silicon Commonwealth agreed. Even their method of territorial expansion might represent a form of communication we simply don't understand yet. Our xenolinguists have cracked the languages of 47 different species. Given time and proper resources, they can establish communication with any intelligence. Grand Admiral Mordeth's response was uncharacteristically sharp. "Counselors, in the past 3 weeks, we have lost 200,000 citizens, 37 installations, and 12 ships. If this is communication, the message is clear. They want us gone." The compromise was typically Confederation. A joint task force combining diplomatic, scientific, and military resources would attempt to establish communication while simultaneously preparing defensive measures for core worlds. Ambassador Vental, despite his lack of experience with hostile first contact, volunteered to lead the diplomatic mission. His centuries of experience with peaceful integration made him our most qualified negotiator. The task force consisted of the diplomatic vessel Harmony's Voice escorted by 3 heavy cruisers and supported by 2 science ships equipped with our most advanced analysis equipment. They approached the expanding void with all weapons powered down and all communications arrays broadcasting standard peaceful greeting protocols in 17 different languages. The Void Hunters responded by erasing half the task force in 0.3 seconds. The Harmony's Voice simply ceased to exist. One moment it was transmitting Ambassador Vental's carefully prepared first contact message. The next moment the space it had occupied was empty. Not destroyed, empty, as if it had never existed at all. The heavy cruiser Stalwart managed to record the attack before its own destruction. The data showed that the Void Hunter ships didn't use conventional weapons. Instead, they projected fields that altered the fundamental constants of physics within localized areas. Where these fields touched our ships, the strong nuclear force that held atoms together simply stopped working. Our matter reverted to component particles, then to energy, then to nothing at all. Captain Zareth of the science vessel Inquiry made the tactical decision that saved the mission's survivors. Rather than attempting to engage or negotiate further, he ordered maximum acceleration away from the void and transmitted everything they had recorded directly to Fleet Command. His final message was brief. Diplomacy is impossible. Conventional warfare is impossible. Evacuation may be our only option. The news of Ambassador Vental's death sent shock waves through the Confederation. The elderly diplomat had been a living symbol of our commitment to peaceful coexistence, a reminder that any species could be reasoned with given patience and understanding. His destruction, along with 600 other mission personnel, forced even the most optimistic council members to acknowledge that we faced something unprecedented. The Void Hunters continued their advance, consuming 1 light-year of space every standard day with mechanical precision. Our most advanced computer models predicted they would reach Nexus Prime in approximately 18 months, assuming their expansion rate remained constant. Fleet Command initiated Operation Haven, the largest evacuation effort in galactic history. Core worlds began emergency preparations to relocate entire populations to the outer galaxy, while engineering teams worked frantically to develop new defensive technologies that might slow the Void Hunters' advance. But our efforts felt increasingly futile. How do you fight an enemy that erases the very concept of existence? How do you negotiate with entities that communicate through annihilation? How do you defend against weapons that rewrite the laws of physics? In the depths of my analysis work, reviewing combat footage and sensor data, I found myself remembering Captain Chen's words. In human history, periods of extended peace often ended abruptly when someone decided they preferred conquest to cooperation. The humans had experience with this. They had faced enemies who couldn't be reasoned with, situations where survival required things the Confederation had forgotten. But the Curiosity was still months away from Earth, and even when Captain Chen returned with her diplomatic mission, what could one primitive species offer against entities that treated physics like a mere suggestion? As I compiled my daily reports on Void Hunter capabilities and our increasingly desperate defensive preparations, I couldn't help wondering if humanity's violent history, which had seemed so barbaric just months earlier, might actually represent survival skills we desperately needed. 3 months after Ambassador Vental's death, our deep space monitoring arrays detected new energy signatures approaching from human space. Not the familiar readings of the Curiosity, returning with Earth's diplomatic delegation, but something else entirely. Something that made our most advanced warships look like toys, and generated power readings that shouldn't be possible for a species that had barely mastered fusion technology. Captain Chen was coming back, but she wasn't alone. And whatever humanity was bringing with them, it was ready for war. The human fleet that emerged from hyperspace at the edge of our galaxy bore no resemblance to the small exploration vessel we had welcomed months earlier. 12 ships materialized in perfect formation, their hulls dark and angular, their energy signatures burning so bright they temporarily overloaded every sensor array within 3 light-years. I was in the Strategic Analysis Division's main operations center when the alerts began cascading across our displays. The duty officer, a young Altarian named Kelvesh, stared at the readings in confusion. "Sir," he called to Division Commander Yarok, "I'm detecting massive hyperspace disruptions in Sector 12, but the energy patterns are inconsistent with known technology." Commander Yarok, a veteran analyst whose calm demeanor had guided the division through countless crises, studied the data with growing concern. Classification: unknown, sir. Power output suggests vessels of significant size, but the distribution patterns are unlike anything in our databases. The energy signatures are aggressive. I felt my threat perception instincts activate with an intensity I had never experienced. "Commander, request permission to review the sensor logs directly." The data made no sense. The 12 ships registered energy outputs comparable to our heaviest battle cruisers, but they were barely 400 meters in length. Their hyperspace emergence patterns suggested technology decades ahead of anything we had encountered, yet their quantum signatures identified them as definitely human in origin. "Impossible," muttered Dr. Kesvel, our senior technology analyst. "The humans' fastest ship required 6 months to travel from their space to ours. These vessels would need power sources equivalent to small stars to generate these readings." Commander Yarok activated the priority communication array. Transmission incoming from the lead vessel. The holographic display activated, and Captain Sarah Chen's familiar face appeared. But something had changed in the months since her departure. The curious, diplomatic explorer I remembered had been replaced by someone harder, more focused. Her eyes held the same predatory stillness, but now it seemed more pronounced, like a weapon kept barely sheathed. "This is Captain Chen of the Earth System's Alliance Vessel * Determination. We request immediate communication with Confederation Fleet Command regarding the current tactical situation." The words were polite, but her tone carried an undertone I couldn't identify. Authority, perhaps, or certainty. "Captain Chen," Commander Yarok replied, "welcome back to Confederation space. We would be honored to facilitate diplomatic contact with the Council, though I should inform you that we are currently facing unprecedented challenges that may require postponing formal negotiations." Chen's expression didn't change. "Commander, we're aware of the Void Hunter incursion. That's why we're here. Please connect me with your senior military leadership immediately." The casual way she mentioned the Void Hunters sent a chill through the operations center. The existence of the threat was classified at the highest levels, known only to senior government and military officials. How could the humans possibly be aware of it? "Captain," Commander Yarok said carefully, "I'm not certain what information you may have received, but—" "Commander," Chen's voice cut through the diplomatic pleasantries with surgical precision. "In the past 4 months, you've lost contact with 42 colonies, 17 research stations, and 26 patrol vessels to entities that manipulate fundamental physics. Your current defensive strategies have failed to slow their advance, and your evacuation protocols are proceeding behind schedule. We estimate you have approximately 14 months before they reach Nexus Prime." The operations center fell completely silent. Chen's information was not only classified, but accurate down to details that hadn't been shared outside the senior command staff. "Furthermore," Chen continued, "your most recent engagement attempt resulted in the total loss of Ambassador Vental's diplomatic mission. The attack patterns suggest the enemy uses localized reality manipulation rather than conventional weapons, which explains why your shielding technologies have proved completely ineffective." Commander Yarok's normally steady voice cracked slightly. "Captain Chen, how could you possibly know these details?" For the first time since her image had appeared, Chen smiled. It was not a reassuring expression. "Because we've been monitoring your communications for the past 6 weeks, and because we've encountered similar entities before." "That's impossible," Dr. Kesvel interjected. "Your species has barely achieved interstellar travel. You couldn't have encountered technology this advanced." Chen's smile widened, showing teeth. "Doctor, I think you're laboring under some fundamental misunderstandings about human technological development. May I suggest we continue this conversation in person? We have information that could be crucial to your survival." Within hours, the human fleet had been escorted to Nexus Prime under the tightest security protocols in Confederation history. The Council convened an emergency session, while Fleet Command prepared to receive what might be either salvation or another threat to add to our growing list. I was assigned to the initial briefing team, partly because of my previous contact with Captain Chen and partly because of my species' analytical abilities. As we prepared to board the Determination Asterisk, I tried to reconcile the ship we approached with my understanding of human technology. The vessel was sleek and predatory, its hull covered in angular protrusions that our sensors identified as weapons systems of unknown design. Energy readings from its reactor suggested power generation capabilities that should have required technology centuries beyond human achievement. Most unsettling were the smaller readings scattered throughout the ship, energy signatures that matched no known technology but somehow felt familiar in a way that made my threat perception instincts scream warnings. Captain Chen met us in the Determination's main conference room, accompanied by her senior staff. The humans had changed dramatically during their months away. Gone were the casual, exploratory uniforms I remembered. These humans wore form-fitting black uniforms with subtle armor plating, and every one of them moved with the fluid precision of trained warriors. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings," Chen began, her tone crisp and professional. "Thank you for agreeing to this briefing. I know our arrival has raised questions, so let me address the obvious concerns first. Yes, we've been monitoring your communications. Yes, we've developed new technologies since our last meeting. And yes, we have experience dealing with entities similar to your Void Hunters." Commander Yarok leaned forward. "Captain, with respect, your species was barely achieving interstellar flight 6 months ago. The technological advancement you're displaying should require decades of development." "Under normal circumstances, yes," Chen agreed. "But we haven't been operating under normal circumstances. When the Curiosity returned to Earth with news of your Confederation, we also brought something else. Trace energy readings from the deep space regions beyond your galaxy. Our scientists analyzed those readings and identified them as signatures we'd encountered before." Dr. Morrison, the human military historian I remembered from our first meeting, activated a holographic display. 57 years ago, Earth detected similar energy patterns in our outer system. We dispatched an unmanned probe to investigate and lost contact with it immediately. When we sent a manned mission to investigate, we found nothing. The probe, a small asteroid it had been studying, even the background radiation patterns in that region had simply ceased to exist. The implications hit me immediately. "You've faced the Void Hunters before." "Not the same entities," Chen clarified, "but something very similar. We called them erasers, beings that seemed to exist in the spaces between dimensions, feeding on reality itself. They appeared without warning, consumed everything in a localized area, then vanished." "What did you do?" asked Commander Yarok. Dr. Morrison's expression became grim. "What we always do when faced with an existential threat. We went to war." The holographic display shifted, showing images that made my blood chill. Earth's cities transformed into fortress installations. Massive industrial complexes churning out weapons and ships. Millions of humans training for combat against an enemy that could erase them from existence. "It took us 12 years to develop countermeasures," Chen explained. 12 years of losing entire cities, entire populations, to entities that treated our reality like a computer program they could edit. But humans have one advantage that most species seem to lack. We're very good at adapting to impossible circumstances. "What kind of countermeasures?" I asked, though I wasn't certain I wanted to know the answer. Commander Lisa Park, the human engineer, smiled with the same predatory expression I'd noticed in Chen. "We learned to fight fire with fire. If they could manipulate reality, we needed to learn to manipulate it better." The display showed technical schematics that hurt to look at directly, weapons that seemed to fold space around their targets, shields that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, ships powered by reactors that shouldn't be possible according to known physics. "We studied their attack patterns, reverse-engineered their technology, and developed our own versions of reality manipulation," Park continued. "It turns out that once you accept that the laws of physics are more like guidelines than absolute rules, you can accomplish remarkable things." Commander Yarok's voice was barely a whisper. "You weaponized dimensional manipulation." "We weaponized everything," Chen corrected. "Because when extinction is the alternative, moral considerations become secondary to survival. We turned our entire civilization into a war machine designed to fight enemies that existed outside normal space-time. The briefing continued for hours, with the humans sharing technologies and tactical approaches that seemed impossible yet somehow worked. They had developed weapons that could target entities across multiple dimensions, shields that made their ships temporarily cease to exist when attacked, and strategic doctrines based on the assumption that any conflict might require rewriting fundamental aspects of reality. But what disturbed me most wasn't their technology. It was their casual acceptance of warfare as a solution to problems that should be approached through diplomacy and understanding. "Captain," I asked during a brief recess, "don't you find it troubling that your species' first instinct when facing the unknown is violence?" Chen studied me with those predatory eyes. "Analyst Zekthara, let me ask you something. When the Void Hunters erased Ambassador Vental and his entire diplomatic mission, what was your species' response?" We attempted to develop new diplomatic approaches." "And how effective were those approaches?" I didn't answer immediately. "The difference between humans and the Confederation," Chen said quietly, "is that we learned a long time ago that some problems can't be solved through peaceful negotiation. Sometimes, the only way to preserve peace is to become very, very good at war." As I reviewed the human technical data that evening, preparing my analysis report, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Confederation was about to learn something fundamental about the nature of survival in a hostile universe. The humans weren't offering to save us out of altruism or diplomatic courtesy. They were preparing to teach us how to fight a war we couldn't imagine, using methods we couldn't comprehend, against enemies that violated everything we thought we knew about the nature of reality itself. And looking at the data on their weapon systems, I realized that we were about to discover why Captain Chen had smiled when she mentioned their experience with impossible circumstances. The humans weren't just ready for war. They were war itself, refined and perfected over generations of facing the impossible and refusing to surrender. The transformation of the Confederation's military forces under human guidance was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Within 6 weeks of their arrival, every aspect of our defensive strategy had been revolutionized, rebuilt from the ground up according to principles that challenged everything we thought we understood about warfare, technology, and survival itself. I was assigned as liaison between the Strategic Analysis Division and the newly formed Human Confederation Joint Command, a position that gave me unprecedented access to the most classified aspects of our war preparations. What I witnessed during those weeks still haunts my dreams. The humans approached warfare with the same systematic thoroughness they had once applied to their scientific exploration, but magnified by an intensity that bordered on terrifying. Every Confederation vessel was retrofitted with human technology that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Every crew member underwent training in combat doctrines that assumed conventional physics were merely suggestions to be ignored when convenient. Admiral Chen, she had been promoted to overall commander of joint operations, established her headquarters aboard the massive command ship Retribution Asterisk, a vessel that hadn't existed 3 weeks earlier but somehow incorporated technology that our best engineers insisted should require centuries to develop. "The key to fighting reality manipulators," Chen explained to the assembled Confederation fleet commanders, "is accepting that reality is subjective. Your ships exist in normal space-time. The Void Hunters exist across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. To engage them effectively, you need to exist everywhere they do." The holographic display showed a 3-dimensional representation of local space-time, but with additional layers that hurt to perceive directly. Human dimensional warfare doctrine assumes that every engagement takes place across at least 7 different reality states simultaneously. Your weapons must target the enemy in all 7 states. Your shields must protect you in all 7 states. Your navigation systems must track movement through all 7 states. Commander Thekvel of the Altarian 5th Fleet raised what would have been a hand if his species possessed them. "Admiral Chen, with respect, our crews have trained for 3 centuries in conventional space combat. You're asking us to master completely alien concepts in a matter of weeks." Chen's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. "Commander, in approximately 11 months, the Void Hunters will reach Nexus Prime. They will erase this planet, every person on it, and continue their advance toward the core worlds. Your choice is to master alien concepts in a few weeks or cease to exist permanently. The silence that followed was profound. Furthermore, Chen continued, human doctrine assumes that every member of a combat crew is expendable if necessary to complete the mission. Individual survival is secondary to overall victory. I need to know now if your crews can accept that operational reality. The question sparked heated debate among the Confederation commanders. Our military traditions emphasize the preservation of life above all other considerations. Ships were designed with extensive evacuation protocols, medical facilities, and safety systems that prioritized crew survival even in catastrophic circumstances. Admiral, protested Captain Vorelan of the Crystalline Hegemony, the Confederation has maintained its ethical principles throughout 3 millennia of space operations. We cannot simply abandon the fundamental values that define our civilization. Chen's laugh was sharp and bitter. Captain, your fundamental values are the reason you're losing this war. The Void Hunters don't care about your ethics, your crew safety protocols, or your commitment to preserving life. They exist to erase reality itself. Fighting them requires abandoning every comfortable assumption you've made about the nature of conflict. She activated another holographic display, this one showing combat footage from humanity's war against their own reality manipulators. The images were difficult to process. Ships that flickered in and out of existence, weapons that fired through multiple dimensions, explosions that consumed not just matter but the very concept of space in localized areas. This is what real warfare looks like, Chen said quietly. Not the carefully controlled engagements you've trained for, but absolute commitment to victory regardless of cost. Every human in this footage understood that their death was acceptable if it brought us closer to survival as a species. The footage showed human ships deliberately ramming enemy vessels, their crews accepting annihilation to deliver dimensional weapons at point-blank range. It showed entire squadrons sacrificing themselves to protect evacuation fleets. It showed commanders making decisions that guaranteed the deaths of thousands to save millions. Humans fight wars to win them, Chen continued. We don't fight to minimize casualties or preserve infrastructure or maintain moral superiority. We fight to ensure that our enemies cannot threaten us again, ever. Over the following days, I watched the Confederation's military transform under human influence. Our crews learned to operate weapons that violated known physics. Our ships were retrofit with technology that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Our tactical doctrines were rewritten to assume that every engagement might require sacrificing friendly forces to achieve strategic objectives. But the most disturbing change was psychological. The humans didn't just teach us new technologies and tactics, they taught us to think like predators. Every species in this galaxy has evolved beyond predatory instincts, Dr. Morrison explained during a briefing for senior staff. You've created a peaceful, cooperative civilization by suppressing the behavioral patterns that allowed your ancestors to survive hostile environments. But the Void Hunters are the ultimate hostile environment. To fight them, you need to rediscover instincts your species has forgotten. The training programs the humans developed were unlike anything in Confederation history. Our crews learned to make split-second tactical decisions based on aggression rather than cooperation. They practiced operating their ships like weapons rather than exploration vessels. They trained to view enemy forces not as potential diplomatic partners, but as existential threats to be eliminated with maximum efficiency. I struggled with the psychological aspects of our transformation. My threat perception instincts, which had served me well as an analyst, became overwhelming in the human training environment. Every human officer radiated predatory potential that made my evolutionary warning systems scream constant alerts. It's not personal, Commander Park assured me during one particularly difficult training session. Humans aren't naturally violent toward allies, but we've learned to weaponize everything about ourselves when survival is at stake. Right now, every human in this fleet is a weapon system first and an individual second. The statement should have been reassuring. Instead, it made me realize that the humans weren't just teaching us to fight the Void Hunters. They were transforming us into something more like themselves. Something that prioritized victory over ethics, survival over principles, and effectiveness over comfort. 2 months after their arrival, Admiral Chen announced that our forces were ready for their first engagement with the Void Hunters. The enemy had continued their advance, consuming space at their steady pace of 1 light-year per day. They were now approximately 9 months from Nexus Prime, well within range of our enhanced sensor arrays. The joint Human Confederation fleet that departed for the engagement zone bore no resemblance to the peaceful exploration forces the galaxy had known for millennia. 67 vessels equipped with reality manipulation technology, their crews trained in dimensional warfare tactics that assumed massive casualties, were not only acceptable, but inevitable. I accompanied the fleet aboard the command ship Retribution Asterisk, where Admiral Chen had established her tactical coordination center. The ship's interior was a maze of technology that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, with control systems that responded to thought patterns rather than physical manipulation. "Remember," Chen addressed the fleet commanders in the final briefing before engagement, "the Void Hunters communicate through annihilation. They don't negotiate, they don't retreat, and they don't show mercy. Your only options are total victory or total extinction. There is no middle ground in dimensional warfare." When we finally encountered the Void Hunter fleet at the edge of the consumed zone, I understood why the humans had been so focused on psychological preparation. The enemy ships were even more impossible than our previous footage had suggested. Massive structures that existed across multiple reality states, their weapons capable of erasing not just matter, but the very concept of existence in localized areas. But for the first time since the crisis began, we were ready for them. The human-designed weapons fired through dimensional barriers that the Void Hunters had assumed were impenetrable. Our ships phased in and out of normal space-time, making it impossible for the enemy to target us effectively. Our tactical doctrines anticipated their reality manipulation techniques and countered with manipulations of our own. The battle lasted 17 minutes and resulted in the complete destruction of a Void Hunter fleet that had seemed invincible just months earlier. But the victory came at a cost. We lost 19 ships and over 4,000 crew members, casualties that would have been considered catastrophic under previous Confederation standards. Yet Admiral Chen's assessment was clinical. Acceptable losses for a successful engagement against reality manipulators. As I watched the human and Confederation survivors celebrate their victory with equal enthusiasm, I realized that we had indeed been transformed. The crews that returned to Nexus Prime were no longer peaceful explorers who happened to possess military training. They were warriors who had learned to embrace the terrible mathematics of survival warfare. The Confederation had learned to fight like humans, and in doing so, we had become something fundamentally different from what we had been before. Looking at Admiral Chen's satisfied expression as she reviewed casualty reports and planned our next engagement, I finally understood why the humans had smiled when they first mentioned their experience with impossible circumstances. They weren't just offering to help us survive the Void Hunters. They were offering to teach us to become predators ourselves, because in their experience, only predators survived encounters with existential threats. The question that haunted me as we prepared for the larger campaign ahead was whether the galaxy would recognize what we had become once the war was over. The final battle against the Void Hunters took place in the space between galaxies, in a region where reality itself was thin and malleable. Admiral Chen had determined that fighting the enemy on the edge of normal space-time would give us tactical advantages that might prove decisive in ending their threat permanently. I watched from the Strategic Coordination Center aboard the Asterisk Retribution as our combined fleet, now over 300 vessels incorporating human dimensional warfare technology, prepared for what Chen had designated as total extinction protocols. The phrase itself revealed how completely the Confederation's military philosophy had transformed under human influence. "This isn't just about stopping their advance toward our galaxy," Chen explained to the assembled commanders. "The Void Hunters have consumed entire civilizations across multiple galactic clusters. Today we end that threat for every species that might encounter them in the future." The strategic display showed the enemy force in all its impossible magnitude. Where our first encounter had involved a single Void Hunter fleet, we now faced their primary swarm, thousands of reality-manipulating entities accompanied by mobile structures the size of small moons. Their combined presence was literally eroding the fabric of space-time around them, creating expanding zones where the laws of physics simply ceased to function. Intelligence analysis suggests this represents the entire Void Hunter species, reported Commander Park. They don't maintain separate populations or backup colonies. This swarm is their civilization, their military force, and their reproductive capacity combined into a single mobile entity. The implications were staggering. Victory would mean complete genocide of an entire species. Under the old Confederation principles, such an action would have been unthinkable. But after months of human training, our commanders discussed the tactical requirements for species-level extinction with clinical detachment. "Are we certain there are no alternatives?" asked Captain Yithvar, one of the few officers who still occasionally questioned human methods. "Perhaps we could establish communication, negotiate territorial boundaries." Chen's response was immediate and sharp. "Captain, the Void Hunters have had opportunities to communicate during every engagement. Their consistent response has been to attempt our complete annihilation. They are not a species that negotiates. They are a force of nature that consumes reality itself. You don't negotiate with entropy." The battle began with our dimensional weapons firing across 7 different reality states simultaneously. The human-designed systems allowed us to target the Void Hunters in dimensions they had previously considered safe, disrupting their reality manipulation techniques and forcing them to exist primarily in normal space-time. But the enemy adapted faster than our projections had anticipated. Within minutes of engagement, they began generating countermeasures that neutralized our dimensional advantages. Worse, they started coordinating their reality manipulation techniques, creating zones of altered physics that turned our own weapons against us. "They're learning," reported Dr. Kesvel from the Tactical Analysis Station. "Their adaptation rate is exponential. At current rates, they'll develop complete immunity to our weapons systems within 47 minutes. Admiral Chen studied the tactical display with predatory focus. "Then we end this in 46 minutes. All units, implement Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was the most extreme tactical doctrine the humans had developed, a strategy that assumed friendly casualties approaching 100% in exchange for guaranteed enemy annihilation. It involved converting our entire fleet into weapons delivery systems, with each ship designed to cause maximum damage even after its destruction. "Admiral," I said, my voice barely steady, "Protocol 7 will result in the loss of our entire force." "Yes," Chen agreed, "but it will also eliminate the Void Hunter threat permanently. Every species in this galaxy, and every species they might have encountered in the future, will survive because of what we do here today." What followed was unlike any military engagement in recorded galactic history. Our ships began systematic kamikaze attacks against the largest Void Hunter entities, each vessel configured to detonate its dimensional reactor in a cascade failure that would tear holes in reality itself. Entire squadrons sacrificed themselves to deliver weapons that existed partially outside normal space-time, making them impossible for the enemy to defend against. I watched crews from dozens of species, beings who had known only peace for centuries, willingly flying their ships into certain death because they had learned to think like humans. They had absorbed the fundamental human principle that individual survival was meaningless compared to species survival, that any sacrifice was acceptable if it ensured the continuation of life itself. The Altarian 7th Fleet performed a coordinated ramming attack that destroyed a Void Hunter command structure the size of a space station. The crystalline hegemony's heavy cruisers formed a wall of dimensional fire that carved through enemy formations like a blade through mist. The Zephyrian Collective's fighters swarmed the largest Void Hunter entities, each pilot knowing their attack was also their death. But it was the humans themselves who demonstrated why their species had become legendary among the Confederation forces. When conventional tactics failed, they began using their bodies as weapons. I watched in horrified fascination as human crew members deliberately exposed themselves to Void Hunter reality manipulation fields, allowing the enemy's weapons to partially erase them from existence, while they used the dimensional distortion to deliver weapons that could only function in the space between reality and non-existence. Captain Sarah Chen, the woman who had first introduced humanity to our galaxy, personally piloted a fighter loaded with dimensional explosives into the heart of the largest Void Hunter entity. Her final transmission was broadcast across all fleet channels. "Tell Earth we held the line." The explosion that followed erased a sphere of spacetime 3 light-years in diameter. taking with it the central coordination node that controlled the entire Void Hunter swarm. Without their primary command structure, the remaining Void Hunters lost their ability to coordinate reality manipulations. Our surviving forces, less than 20 ships from our original fleet of over 300, were able to systematically eliminate the scattered survivors using conventional dimensional weapons. The entire engagement lasted 53 minutes. When it ended, the Void Hunter threat had been permanently eliminated, but at a cost that would have been inconceivable under the old Confederation military doctrine. In the aftermath, as we surveyed the wreckage of both fleets and the permanent scars our battle had left in the fabric of spacetime itself, I finally understood what the humans had been trying to teach us all along. Peace was not the absence of violence. It was the ability to unleash controlled violence so effectively that potential threats chose not to challenge you. The Confederation's 3 millennia of harmony had existed only because we had never encountered enemies who couldn't be reasoned with. The humans, who had faced such enemies repeatedly throughout their history, had learned that sometimes the only way to preserve civilization was to become temporarily more dangerous than anything that might threaten it. The surviving human officers displayed no celebration, no satisfaction at their victory. They simply began the systematic process of analyzing combat data and preparing for potential future threats. For them, this had been just another day in their eternal war against entropy. "The galaxy is safe," Admiral Chen's successor, Commander Morrison, reported to the Confederation Council. "But you need to understand that this safety was purchased with blood and will need to be maintained the same way. The universe contains forces that cannot be negotiated with, cannot be reasoned with, and cannot be allowed to exist if life is to continue." The reconstruction period that followed revealed the true scope of how the war had changed us. The surviving Confederation forces returned to their home worlds as completely different beings from those who had departed. They had learned to think strategically about violence, to calculate acceptable losses, to prioritize survival over ethics when circumstances demanded it. More importantly, they had learned to recognize threats that conventional diplomacy couldn't address. When pirates began raiding outer system colonies, the response was swift and permanent. When a rogue AI achieved consciousness and began consuming planetary data networks, the containment protocol involved sterilizing entire systems. When the hegemony of distant stars attempted to expand into Confederation space through subtle economic manipulation, the diplomatic response included implicit threats backed by demonstrated capabilities. The galaxy had learned what humans had always known, that peaceful civilizations could only exist because somewhere, someone was prepared to do violence on their behalf. Today, 50 years after the Void Hunter War, I serve as director of the Confederation Threat Assessment Division. My office walls are lined with reports from across the galaxy, intelligence analyses, strategic assessments, and contingency plans for dealing with forces that cannot be reasoned with. Humanity has become the Confederation's designated specialists in impossible warfare. When threats emerge that conventional forces cannot address, we call on the humans and their students. They maintain fleets equipped with reality manipulation technology, crews trained in dimensional combat tactics, and strategic doctrines that assume casualties are acceptable costs for victory. The other species in the Confederation sometimes whisper that we have become too much like the humans, too willing to choose violence over diplomacy. They point to our military buildups, our aggressive threat assessment protocols, and our willingness to destroy potential enemies before they become actual problems. But they sleep peacefully in their homes because they know that somewhere in the dark spaces between stars, human ships patrol the boundaries of known space, ready to respond to threats that would erase entire civilizations without hesitation. They don't understand that peace is not a natural state. It is a carefully maintained artificial condition that requires constant vigilance and the occasional demonstration of overwhelming force. The humans taught us that the price of civilization is the willingness to become temporarily uncivilized when circumstances demand it. This is why the stars tremble when humanity goes to war. Not because they fear human weapons or human tactics, but because they recognize in humanity something that most species have forgotten: the absolute commitment to survival that turns ordinary beings into forces of nature. The universe is vast and contains wonders beyond imagination. but it also contains threats that view existence itself as something to be consumed. In such a universe, the greatest act of civilization is the preservation of barbarism, controlled, directed, and unleashed only when the alternative is extinction. Humanity understood this before they ever left their home world. Now, thanks to their teaching, the entire galaxy understands it as well. We learned why the stars tremble. And in learning, we discovered that sometimes, making the universe afraid of you is the only way to keep the things you love safe. The war with the Void Hunters ended 50 years ago. But humanity's real war, the eternal conflict against entropy, chaos, and the forces that would unmake civilization, continues in the dark spaces between stars, fought by beings who understand that the price of peace is the willingness to embrace controlled violence when mercy would mean extinction. This is the lesson Captain Sarah Chen brought to our galaxy. This is why, even now, when children of a dozen species wake from nightmares, their parents tell them not to fear the dark. Because somewhere in that darkness, humans are standing watch,